Alright, welcome back guys. This is the last video for my Battle for Zendikar review, focused on limited only. Here we're looking at the actual colorless creatures, not the devoid cards that have colored casting costs, but just the ones that you can throw in any deck without having to worry what kind of colored mana you're playing. These cards are absurd. Even the commons are absurd, the ones we're about to see. So keep that in mind. Most of these cards, if you open them and you get one of these sweet rares, you're probably throwing it in your deck and you're probably going to try to play it. That's not true of all these cards, but most of them I think fit that qualification. As promised though, we're going to start off with Kiora because I left it off under the multicolor card. So let's read this chick real quick. 4 mana, starts off at 4 loyalty. +1, untap up to 1 target creature and up to 1 target land. -2, reveal the top 4 cards of your library. You can put a creature and or land from among them into your hand, put the rest into your graveyard. And then -8 is just something ridiculous. You get an emblem with whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may have it fight target creature. Then put 3 8/8 blue octopus creature tokens onto the battlefield. So yeah, if you get to that -8, I can't see how you can lose the game. You've got to be the most unlucky person in the world to -8 this Kiora and still lose. But the +1 and the -2 are really what you're looking at. If you were to play this and just -2 twice in a row using Kiora, you're really drawing 4 cards, assuming of course you hit a creature and a land each time. The +1 is really pretty good too. It allows you to either attack or use the activated ability of one of your creatures, and technically ramps you and untaps that creature at the same time. So Kiora pushes you ahead on mana, lets you use your creatures most efficiently, and its minus ability lets you filter through cards and pick up extra cards in your hand. Basically a divination every turn in ideal circumstances. The -8 is just absurd. It's what you want out of a Planeswalker ability, and I look forward to seeing any games that end with a bunch of 8/8 octopi on the field. The minus ability feels very similar to the previous Kiora's abilities, and in fact this Kiora feels a lot like the previous Kiora, but just much better and much more efficient. The 4 loyalty cost is much higher than the previous Kiora, which I believe started at 2 and +1 to 3. This Kiora has a little bit of trouble protecting itself if you don't have other creatures on the field already. So in that situation, it's a little bit worse, but it's already a good playable card. And if you know for a fact it's just going to die anyway, and you want to run it out there, you can get value off of its -2 ability. Alright, so actually where we're supposed to be on the colorless creatures, we start out with the Causal X Channel. This is a 5 mana 4/4, taps to add 2 to your mana pool. So this is a mid-range card that ramps you into your late game cards. Oftentimes these 5 mana below curve creatures or 5 mana 4/4 type creatures, you're using them to muck up the board, stop your opponent from attacking you, start attacking yourself, doing something. And you don't often use 5 mana cards to ramp to even higher mana, but that might be something you want to do, and this card will let you do it. This card is a little bit difficult to kill, so it has that going for it, and the extra 2 mana can actually be quite useful. So you want to get this guy out as soon as possible so you can start using the mana off of it to start fueling your other big creatures. Alright, and then we get Eldrazi Devastator, our 8 mana 8/9 with Trampler, or is a Trampler with Trample. So do I have to say anything else? 8 mana 8/9 Trample, absolutely huge. It is, I would say it's the Ulamog's Crusher of the format, but Trample instead of Annihilator 2 seems like a significant difference. This is a card that you want to pick up and then draft all the Eldrazi Scions, get it out as early as possible, and just start slamming your opponent with it. Cards like this are a beast for another reason, and that's because, as I've mentioned in one of the other videos, if not more, a lot of the removal in this set is damage based. White and red have good removal, but they have damage based removal. It'll take a card like Bone Splinters or Ruinous Path to take down an 8/9. And if not, this thing is getting in damage no matter what gets thrown in front of it. So it's going to have to take a lot of work to take this guy down. And I think it's just an intimidating card, art and power toughness alone. So this guy is going to make it into a lot of decks, and he is going to win games. Scour from Existence, a card that I need a little bit of help on deciding how good it is. 7 mana instant, very simple, exile target permanent. So unconditional removal is good. I don't know if 7 mana removal is what you want, though. I imagine a card that just said 7 mana destroy a creature or 7 mana destroy blah 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 doesn't seem like something you want. Obviously, you want to be using Scour from Existence to deal with something that you can't deal with in any other way, because 7 mana to remove something that costs less than 7 mana is not ideal. There are also games where you don't quite make it to 7 mana, and you don't want your removal spell to be so far out of range that you can't play it. So even though I think most of the time I'd be fine with one of these, I definitely don't want multiples, and I don't think the card is amazing, but I think it's fine, and it is removal that fits into any color, which is worth noting. Ruin Processor, another common. This one's a 7/8, unfortunately, not an 8/9. So we're down a point over the Devastator. But here we get to process a card and gain 5 life when it enters the battlefield. That's fine. I don't know that life gain is super relevant on our giant creatures, but it does help if we stumble on lands and we start taking hits, that our big creatures and our big payoff cards in the late game do gain us some of that life back. So gaining life is just a bonus here, but the 7/8 body is already playable enough on a 7-drop, and again, fits in any deck that you want it to, so I'd be happy playing this card most of the time. Hedron Blade is an equipment, 1 mana to play, 2 mana to equip. Equipped creature gets +1/+1, and whenever equipped creature becomes blocked by 1 or more colorless creatures, it gains Death Touch until end of turn. Now, this card I think is actually quite bad. If it gave your creature Death Touch when it blocked rather than when it becomes blocked, it would be a different story. You could use it defensively as a tool to fight some of these huge Eldrazi. But your opponent, most of the time, just isn't going to throw anything that dies to Death Touch in the way of this. And if they throw something that's not colorless in the way, all you're getting is a +1/+1 bonus. For a total of 3 mana, the equip cost being 2 is actually relevant here. Compare it to Veteran Sidearm, which most of the time this is going to be a more expensive Veteran Sidearm, and I don't really even want to pay the mana I already do for Veteran Sidearm. So I don't think you're going to get Death Touch off of this a lot. Sure, it can push through things like Eldrazi Scion, but whatever this is equipped to was probably pushing through those anyway. So I don't think this is a very playable card and will very rarely make the cut. Titan's Presence is a little bit tricky for a removal card. It's a 3 mana instant. As an additional cost to cast Titan's Presence, reveal a colorless creature card from your hand. Exile target creature if its power is less than or equal to the revealed card's power. So in order to make this work most efficiently, you want to have some big guy like Eldrazi Devastator in your hand and use Titan's Presence as a removal spell for almost anything. There are times where you'll have Titan's Presence and you can't cast it, or something you really need to remove has more power than the highest power card in your hand. So Titan's Presence plays very well alongside the expensive guys, and it is true that Devoid makes the cards in your hand colorless as well, so there are plenty of options, enough I think to make Titan's Presence viable, but sometimes a bad card. I would be happy picking up most of these, but I would need to make sure I have the right cards to make it work. Deathless Behemoth is an interesting one. 6/6 Vigilance for 6. So we've got quite a bit of power, and Vigilance on a big creature is much much more potent than Vigilance on a little creature, because attacking with the 6/6 and blocking with it the next turn is huge. This guy's activated ability is quite good as well. Sacrifice 2 Eldrazi Scions, return Deathless Behemoth from your graveyard to your hand. Activate this only at sorcery speed. So if this guy dies in combat, which is already a little bit tricky for your opponent to pull off, but if it does die in combat and you've got spare Eldrazi Scions, guess what? You can get it back, cast it again. Not quite Deathless, but repeatable Behemoth. A threat that you can get back multiple times, and a good threat at that. Hopefully you're not using your Eldrazi Scion to ramp this guy out. You want to kind of pay the 6 mana for this, and then keep your Eldrazi Scion in case it dies. But this card can be a threat that I imagine will win a couple games by itself as well. Breaker of Armies is absurdly strong. 8 mana, 10/8. A 10/8 for 8 mana. All creatures able to block it do so. So in a lot of situations, that means Breaker of Armies is actually going to die. There are board states where when this attacks, your opponent will have a total power of 8 that they will throw in front of this. Now, a lot of times, if you were to attack with just a vanilla 10/8, your opponent would chump block. But in this case, your opponent's probably going to lose 2 to 3, maybe even more creatures off of Breaker of Armies. Even if that means trade in the Breaker, that's a pretty good deal. Now, this is an even stronger effect when you're attacking with other creatures as well. Breaker of Armies pulling in all of your opponent's creatures and provoking them means that all of your other attackers are getting through no matter what. So, as absurd as it is, it really does win you the game. It should win you the game most of the time. And if this ever gets a direct hit in, your opponent can just kind of pack it in for the game. Alright, and then there's this guy, which I think is busted for an uncommon. Ulamog's Despoiler. 6 mana for a 5/5. As Ulamog's Despoiler enters the battlefield, you can process 2 cards from your opponent's graveyard, or from your opponent's exile zones. If you do, Ulamog's Despoiler enters with 4+1/+1 counters on it. So if you can set up 2 cards in exile for when you play this card and it enters the battlefield, you get a 9/9 for 6. That is gigantic. For 6 mana that you can fit in any deck and you can reliably exile 2 cards, 9/9. I'm picking this guy almost all the time I see him. This, I think, is going to be one of the best uncommons in the set, even stronger than half the other Eldrazi here, and stronger than a lot of the rares in this set. It might be a little too early to call this the Sentinel of the Eternal Watch of the format, but it's definitely looking that way. 6 mana 9/9 is not a joke. This creature is truly a beating if you can get those counters onto it, but I don't imagine that's very difficult in the type of decks that you'll be playing in this format. We get Bane of Bella Ged. This is I might be pronouncing that incorrectly. A 7 mana 7/5. When it attacks, defending player exiles 2 permanents he or she controls. So essentially Annihilator, except your opponent exiles. The 5 toughness means that this is easily multi-blocked and it will die in combat a lot. But the 7 power means, like a lot of the other creatures here, you're probably picking off a couple things in response. And if you ever untap with it and you get to start attacking, your opponent is already behind 2 cards. Usually that'll just be lands, the same way it is with Annihilator. But if not, if your opponent really needs to drop their huge creature, their 7-drop of their own, and you're setting them back 2 lands or 2 creatures, you're going to be way ahead of the game. So I like this card at uncommon. I think the ability is fine, even though we were promised no Annihilator, but it's not technically Annihilator. And this card, I would be... I say this about almost all the cards on this slide, but I'd be happy playing this if I pulled it. Slab Hammer, equipment that I think has the potential to be quite good. So 2 to play, 2 to equip. So it's not getting started super early. When equipped creature attacks, you may return a land you control to its owner's hand. If you do, the creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Now the +2/+2 is not really what excites me here. It's the return in a land you control back to your hand. With landfall being the way it is, returning a land to your hand, making your creature bigger, and then replaying it is quite good. And it's any land, not just a basic land. So if we're using it in conjunction, with some of the common tap lands, for instance, the red one that gives +1/+0 in first strike, +1/+1 in first strike, then you're making a huge swings with the Slab Hammer. It takes a while to get going, and it's not always going to make the cut. It's also pretty slow as far as casting cost and equipment goes, and the boost +2/+2 is not huge. There's also the note that if you're not returning a land to your hand, for instance, you need to curve into something, then the equipment doesn't actually do anything. But having the ability to abuse this and repeatedly trigger landfall and enter the battlefield triggers off of certain lands makes the potential on this worth noting. Pilgrim's Eye is back. A 3-mana 1/1 flyer is a little weak, but when it enters the battlefield, you get to go search for a basic land and put it into your hand. I like Pilgrim's Eye. I've played it quite a bit, and being able to grab that extra land is pretty useful. This body is probably just going to get thrown away as a blocker. Attacking for 1 by turn 4 is not going to change the game very much, and your opponent's very likely to get a flyer that just gets in the way of this. So once Pilgrim's Eye grabs your land, you're pretty happy just throwing it away to soak up some damage. This is very useful in multicolored decks, and it's fine in 1 or 2 color decks anyway, just as a way to grab an additional land and ensure that you're hitting your land drops. Pathway Arrows, another equipment here, 1 to play and 2 to equip. Equipped creature has 2, tap, this creature deals 1 damage to target creature. If it's colorless, if a colorless creature is dealt damage this way, tap it. Clearly you want to be throwing this on a guy with Death Touch, then you can just ping anything. The second clause about tapping a colorless creature seems like it could be useful sometimes, but isn't actually going to make this card very playable. This seems like more of a sideboard card against decks that either suffer from taking 1 damage or have big colorless creatures you can't deal with. You don't really want to just be tapping down a blocker because you're tapping down a creature and using mana in order to use this ability in the first place. If I had at least 2 creatures with Death Touch, I would main deck this, but otherwise I would keep it in the sideboard. Hedron Archive, another ramp card, 4 mana, add 2 to your mana pool. So we're already going from 4 to 6, potentially from 4 to 7 on the following turn you play this. And we can trade it in for 2 cards. So some people have called this Double Mind Stone, rightfully so. This adds 2 mana at a time and ramps you into spells that are going to take advantage of that extra mana. And once you no longer need the Hedron Archive, you can trade it in for 2 cards. I think this card is great. I don't think you want multiples of it. 1 does the job just fine. Having multiples of it doesn't seem very beneficial unless you need to play 10 drops, but even then I would rather just play 1. There are lots of ways to ramp in this set, so having just 1 Hedron Archive seems fine, and trading in for 2 cards makes it great. And moving on to the rare, starting with an absolutely absurd one. First off, this is a 10 drop, so you know when you're paying 10 mana for a creature, you're going to get something out of it. So not only do we get a 10/10 here, but read this. When you cast Desolation Twin, put a 10/10 colorless Eldrazi creature token onto the battlefield. So 10 mana, you get 20 power and 20 toughness worth of creatures. It's on casting too. So Desolation Twin is getting countered by that guy who thinks it's cute to play blue counter spells. You still get a 10/10 out of the deal. And guess what? That 10/10, that's not dying. Unless your opponent bone splinters it, which I imagine every time I play Desolation Twin, my opponent will have double bone splinters. But this is a huge card, like absolutely amazing. 10 mana for 20 power. 10 mana for enough power to end the game, basically. This card won't end the game straight up, but how long can your opponent really keep up with 2 10/10 creatures? Spoiler, the answer is not very long. This card looks awesome. It's going to be one of the... It is tied for the most expensive card in the set, but the payout is absolutely absurd, and I think it's worth drafting around and taking all of the ramps so that you can actually get this guy onto the battlefield. Alright, a little less expensive here. Conduit of Ruin. We get a 5/5 for 6, which is fine. When you cast Conduit of Ruin, you may search your library for a colorless creature card with converted mana cost 7 or greater, reveal it, then shuffle your library and put that card on top of it. The first creature spell you cast each turn costs 2 less to cast. This is pretty cool card. Very nice design. So once you get to 6 mana, you get to search up something even bigger for your next turn, and you're almost guaranteed to be able to cast it. With the 2 less to cast per turn, you can probably cast it for 8, maybe 9 mana if you have an additional land. So if you're looking to actually play that Desolation Twin and you have Conduit of Ruin, they come together very well. The added bonus here is that even if you don't have a 7 converted mana card or to put on top, you still get the second ability even if you're not playing colorless creature spells. So even if your first creature spell on the following turn is a 3 mana 2/2 or something like that, and it costs green and 2, you only have to pay green to cast it. So this guy saves you a lot of mana in the long run and basically pushes one strong creature into another and sets up your turns very well. Once you've got a big guy on the field, you want to make sure you can continue to apply pressure, and this guy does it in a way where you're going to add a lot of power to the board. Blight Herder, again a solid card here. This one's 5 mana for a 4/5. When you cast Blight Herder, you may put 2 cards from exile into your opponent's graveyard. If you do, put 3 1/1 Eldrazi Scions onto the battlefield. So if you are reliably able to cast this and process your opponent's 2 cards, you get a total of 7 power and 8 toughness for 5 mana. That's absurd. I'm thinking Rakshasa Gravecrawler, the zombie creature that for 5 mana you could essentially get 7/10 on the board in the right circumstances. This has kind of the same feel to it in that you just get a bunch of creatures. Not to mention, those Eldrazi Scion are probably getting sacked for something bigger, since you're only playing Blight Herder on 5. It amazes me that Blight Herder is only a 5-drop. The output you get for doing a little bit of work is fantastic. These are the type of rares, though, once you've picked them, you want to go in on cards that exile so that you can make them as good as possible. And if you are getting the full potential of Blight Herder, you're going to be way ahead of your opponent when you cast it. Endless One, a card that I think is fine in every single deck at any point in the game. X to cast, enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it for 0/0. So at 1 mana, it's a 1/1, 2 mana, it's a 2/2, etc., etc. If you draw it in the late game, it can be a 7 mana 7/7 or an 8 mana 8/8. In the mid game, a 4 mana 4/4 or 5 mana 5/5. It's always a fine creature. It's never an absurd one. I feel like 3 mana 3/3 is where I would really like to cast this if it was in my opening hand, unless I knew for sure I had a way to bounce it back to my hand. But these are the type of cards that you always want to play. This is the type of card that you're always happy opening because you can fit it into your deck no matter what your build is. If you see this pack 3, it's probably going in your deck. I see it very rarely getting cut. Sometimes you'll have to, unfortunately, run this out as something like a 2 mana 2/2. But the situations where this is bad are very few and far between, and the situations where this is alright to very good are going to be much more common. Gruesome Slaughter, so a card I'm divided on here. 6 mana Sorcery. Sorcery is a big deal for this type of card. Until end of turn, colorless creatures you control gain tap. This creature deals damage equal to its power to target creature. So obviously this benefits you. The more colorless creatures you have, the better it gets. It is worth noting that the tap ability is not just fight, it's just a one-sided fight, so your opponent's creatures aren't hitting back. A couple things you can do with this. 6 is expensive, but I think the potential to either wipe your opponent's field or reduce it by a lot are great. You do need to have a lot of colorless creatures, which isn't hard to do in this format, and it even turns your Eldrazi Scions into little pingers for the turn. If you can add up a bunch of your guys to deal with one large creature from your opponent, or you can use your creatures to just clear off blockers for the turn. This card is versatile enough that I think I would take it, and I think it's going to fit in most decks because most decks will have probably half their creatures devoid and half their creatures not devoid. I might be a little bit unrealistic with that scenario, but I think it works fine. So Gruesome Slaughter, not going into every deck, sometimes going to get cut, but good enough that I'm happy playing it if I have the creature base to support it. Alright, and our final rare here, Aligned Hedron Network, 4 mana artifact. When it enters the battlefield, exile all creatures with power 5 or greater until Aligned Hedron Network leaves the battlefield. So most of the times I see this as being just a 4 mana removal spell for a single creature. Sometimes it'll, since it is a symmetrical effect, it'll get rid of something of yours and something of your opponent's, hopefully benefiting you the most in that situation. And in the best case scenario, you're wiping more than one creature off your opponent's side of the field, some of their bombs, some of their hard to deal with guys, and you're benefiting from it. This artifact and some of the enchantments like Stasis Snare and Quarantine Field have the added bonus that when they exile the cards that they hit, you can then use those exiled cards for your processors and put them back into their opponent's graveyard. So if you exile something with Aligned Hedron Network and then you process that card, if the Hedron Network leaves the battlefield for any reason, they do not get their creature back since it's now in their graveyard and not in exile. A neat little trick there that I don't think is going to be super relevant all the time, but something that's worth keeping in mind. So if you see a pack 1 Aligned Hedron Network, I think you take this card just because every deck is bound to have some big creature that it hits, if not more than one. Alright, and Mythic Time here. So Oblivion Sower was the first Mythic we all saw from this set, and I think it's a good one. The stats are huge, 5/8 for 6. 8 toughness means that this guy is attacking almost unopposed by the time he comes down, and he's blocking for days. When you cast Oblivion Sower, target opponent exiles the top 4 cards of his or her library. Then you may put any number of land cards that player owns from exile onto the battlefield under your control. So when you cast him, you add an additional 4 cards to your opponent's exile. Then you get all of their lands that have been exiled, not just the ones off of Oblivion Sower's ability. So hopefully you hit lands before this using your ingest creatures or your exile spells, and you get a bunch of landfall triggers. If you first pick this card, I think you prioritize landfall creatures, because when Oblivion Sower comes down, you get immediate effect off of all of your landfall guys on the battlefield. That's, of course, assuming you're hitting lands, but you should hit at least 1 to 2 with Oblivion Sower. I think that's not too unrealistic. And in the worst case scenario, you get a 5/8 for 6, so you can't really complain. Void Winnower, perhaps the most unique effect in this set. 9 mana for an 11/9. So arbitrary numbers there. Just throw some odd numbers in there, I guess. Your opponents can't cast. Well, just read this. Think about it carefully. Your opponents can't cast spells with even converted mana costs. So it's not so much that you're using this deliberately, but the effect just hoses certain cards. I don't know where this effect came from or if we ever needed it, but it just shuts off about half your opponent's deck usually. Their 2-drops and 4-drops don't do anything. And then if that weren't bad enough, your opponent can't block with creatures with even converted mana costs. So you've got a bunch of 2 and 4-drops. Tough luck. Guess you're chumping with your 3-drops. It makes it harder for Void Winnower to just be multi-blocked, since realistically, Void Winnower should shut off about half your opponent's deck. If you play this, I imagine you're winning the game, even though there are a number of odd costing cards that can just kill it anyway. the effect is definitely weird and intriguing for me. It's mythic, so it's not going to be relevant a lot of times, and I'll probably just laugh whenever it hits the battlefield. But I am definitely picking it when I see it, and I wonder if it'll actually do anything. Alright, and finally here, Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger. Huge creature. We've got another 10 mana 10/10, this time at Mythic, but this card is great. When you cast Ulamog, exile 2 target permanents. So again, that guy who plays blue and holds up his 3 mana counterspell for your 10 drop, sure, he's countering your Ulamog, but you're still exiling 2 permanents. That's on casting, not on resolution, not on entering the battlefield. So if you make it to the 10 mana here, you're getting rid of your opponent's 2 best cards, which I think is a little better than just gaining life off of a light drop. That means you can afford to take a little bit of a beating if you can rest assured that you're actually going to make it to 10 mana. Going on, Ulamog has Indestructible, so there are some exile effects that will deal with it, but there aren't very many destroy effects. Actually, there are no destroy effects that are just going to take care of Ulamog, so I feel pretty safe knowing that my 10 drop is safe against Bone Splinters, but we have seen a 7 mana exile spell as well as a 6 mana exile spell, and plenty of counter spells that can deal with this. Whenever Ulamog attacks, defending player exiles the top 20 cards of his or her library. So this is at minimum a 2-turn clock. Your opponent can chump, but 20 cards per attack means your opponent's dead in 2 turns, if not 1. I imagine by the time you cast a 10 drop, your opponent might be under 20 cards. So if you're casting Ulamog, you're likely winning with it unless your opponent has the right answer at the right time. The problem here, obviously, is casting Ulamog. So good luck with that. It's tempting in a FNM draft. If you pull Ulamog, you probably want to play it. If I pull it, I'm playing it. Even if I have no ramp in the world, it's going into my deck. The card is bonkers. These mythics especially are just way out of line, and even the common Eldrazi are sick. So that does it for Battle for Zendikar. I like that the bombs are accessible to everyone, so you have the potential to open a bomb for any deck, no matter what colors you're playing. Everybody has access to the same bombs here, so you're very unlikely to see any of the bombs get passed, or at least any of the Eldrazi. People are going to be fighting over Eldrazi, and I am looking forward to matches where both players are racing to their 8 drops or 9 drops or 10 drops, and I would like to see who comes out on top. I'm leaning, as far as color goes, when you go to a pre-release, I don't think you pick a color this time, but I'm leaning towards white and black being the best colors. That's true. White and green being probably the best colors, with black being probably the most synergistic color. Blue I'm not super excited about, and red I think got a little bit hosed. Red is not as aggressive as it normally is, not as fast either. But every color has these guys to look forward to, with the exception of Kiora. And it's going to be a very interesting draft format. So I hope you guys have enjoyed watching. These are all my opinions, of course, so I'm open to other people's opinions. I would love if you comment and let me know what you thought about some of my evaluations, if you disagree or agree, or if you think I'm just greatly overrating or underrating a card. Remind you, this is for limited only, so we do have to bear that in mind. But I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'm looking forward to playing some Battle for Zendikar. I will be uploading videos as soon as it goes up on Magic the Gathering Online. So stay tuned for that. Thank you for watching, comment, and like, and I will see you all next time.